it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome to day 6 of my 2024 Valentine Card Series. Today I'm going to be making a card using Lawn Fawn's Would You Be Mine Swan Soiree and Totally Awesome. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. Starting with my beavers, and I decided to go with some rich brown tones for them today. So I'm using E21, E23, E25, and E27. I'm just going to use the darkest 3 shades for most of the body, and then I'll bring in that E21 on the belly. So I'm starting with that E27 and laying in my shadows, and I did both of them at once since they are kind of attached by that large heart. So I just shaded them in opposite directions. For the first beaver that is facing toward the right, I shaded him on the left-hand side. And then for the second beaver, which I'm calling the girl beaver, she is facing toward the left, so I shaded her on the right-hand side. And that just keeps the face nice and light and gives you a central light source. So once I had that E27 laid in, I blended it out with the E25, and now I'm coming in with that E23 and filling in any remaining white space except for that belly, like I mentioned. Making sure to catch the edge of the previous shade, especially with the darker colors. You can see a bit more of the streakiness if you aren't careful to blend over the previous line. So I'm just going right over the edge of that E25 and dragging it with me into the lightest part of the main section of the body. And then for the belly, I'm just going to come in with that E21 and once again make sure to blend right over the edge of the E23 where they meet up. Then I'm going to keep some of these shades, but I'm going to darken up the combo slightly by adding in the E29, and I'm going to use these 3 shades for the beaver's tail. And I am doing a bit of shading, adding that E29 in the bottom corner of each of the little squares that make up the tail. And then I'll pull that out even further with the E27, but making sure to leave a little bit of white space. You really want to have that highlight to create that contrast, so it makes your darks look nice and dark and then your lights look nice and light. So then I can just quickly go over the entire thing with the E25 to fill in all of the white areas. And I'm also going to use these 3 shades to do the tops of my cattails. I'm just going to be a little more heavy-handed with that E29 so they do look nice and dark. And then I'll bring that E27 in quite a bit further. And then I just have a little bit at the tip for that lightest shade, the E25. Then I'll take the E29 and just color in my beaver's noses, just the 1 shade there since the area is really small. And then I'm going to switch up my browns for the log. I wanted to choose something that would be very different from the beavers, so I went with the E50s. The E50s are generally what I gravitate towards when I color wood. Not always, but I do think that they lend themselves really well to wood. So I'm using E50, E51, E53, E55, and E57. And again, I am going to use just the darkest 3 shades for the main part of the log, and then the lighter 2 shades will be on the cut end. So I started with the E57 and did a little shading down at the bottom and about halfway up the sides, and then also accentuated all the artist drawn lines that indicate the grooves in the wood. Blended out with the E55 and then used the E53. I also added just a touch of E53 on the cut end and then blended out with the other 2 shades like I mentioned. Then I'm bringing in some reds. I wanted to go a little bit on the softer side since it will just match a little bit better with the other images that I'm coloring. So I used R22, R24, and R29, starting with the R29 down at the bottom and then blending up with the R24. I'm being really careful not to get too dark where the words are stamped so that you'll still be able to read them and it'll be nice and legible. and then I'll fill in the center with the R22. And by the way, there are several different things that you can stamp inside that little heart, different phrases, or you can just leave it empty, depends on you. I decided to go with the you and me since this is a Valentine card. Then I'll keep the R22 and add in R01 and R21. I'm going to add some rosy cheeks to my beavers using that R22 and then just softening the edges with the R21. And then I'm also going to color in my 2 dragonflies. Those are from the Totally Awesome stamp set. I'm putting that R22 closest to the body, blending out with the R21. I filled in the lower wings with the R21 and then added a little of the R01 to the edges of the top wings. And then I'll use the same 3 shades to do my water lily, but this time I only added just a little bit of that R22 and I'm coloring it more with the R01 so it's a little bit softer. I also used the R21 to add a rosy cheek to my little duckling, and then for the rest of his body I'm using Y11, Y13, and Y15. Starting with the Y15 for some shadows down his back and on the underside of his wing, blending out with the Y13 and finishing with the Y11. And then for the beak, I'm using YR04 and YR07. For the greenery, I just decided to do them all in the same tones, and I used YG21 and YG23, just those 2 shades, and I'm putting the YG23 down at the bottom for the grasses and on the back side of the lily pad, and then I'll blend out toward the top with the YG21. I think the yellow greens work really nicely with the yellow duckling, so that's why I chose those. And then once I have filled in that lily pad, I will grab a black Sakura Jelly Roll pen and get that going up at the top until it's flowing nicely. And then I'll go over the eye of one of my beavers and also the duckling, and then trim these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I'm first starting with a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface Cardstock, and then I'm going to bring in some Salvage Patina Distress Oxide ink and the Lawn Fawn Cloudy Stencil just to create a little bit of a sky. I'm only going to have a small portion of this showing, so I'm only using just a small scrap of that Bristol Smooth Surface Cardstock. So I am starting on that stencil, putting a bit of pressure down as I leave it so that I get a darker outline, but then lifting off with the pressure so it kind of fades as it goes up towards the top. It just creates a nice dreamy kind of hazy look that I really like. So I'm going to do 3 cloud formations, and then down at the bottom I'll just add a little extra ink in case any of that would show, just so it's not stark white. And then I also wanted to do some splatter details, so I'm going to press the ink pad onto an acrylic block, add a little squirt of water to that and mix it up so it's more fluid, and then tap that off the edge and just create a little bit of a movement on that background. I didn't want to be too heavy-handed with it, I just wanted small little droplets. Then I'm going to take a piece of Lawn Fawn Mermaid cardstock, and I'm going to use the Stitch Simple Wavy Borders from Lawn Fawn to trim off the top, just taping that into place with some Post-it tape. And then after I remeasured that against the background, I realized I wanted it to be just a little bit shorter, so I trimmed off some of the bottom. And now I'm going to take the Ocean Wave accents and just cut a few little waves out of the background to also create a little more interest. So I just did a couple of these because the majority of the water is going to be taken up by my sentiment, but I just wanted to have like a few little accents on the top and the sides. So I ran that through my die cutting machine again, just using the Post-it tape once again to hold those in position. And then I can set this aside, and I'm going to work on my sentiment. I'm using some Lawn Fawn dark brown wood grain cardstock for this. I just thought it would go really nicely with the beaver theme. Then I'll take the letters from Finley's ABCs and just tape them in place so that the wood grain is all going in the same direction. And I'm going to spell out the word "nawsome." I just wanted to create like a little play on words here. So I am just taping those into place again with that Post-it tape until I have the entire word spelled out. And luckily this word doesn't have any duplicates, so I was able to do the entire phrase with just one pass. So I ran that through my die cutting machine and then removed the letters from my plate, and then I'm just going to set those aside so I can work on the rest of my sentiment. And for that, I'm going to use some Lawn Fawn Ballet Slippers cardstock and the Porcupine for You add-on. And there's a phrase that says, "You are so sharp," and I am going to mask off the word "sharp" with a little bit of Post-it tape and then stamp that with the Lawn Fawn bubblegum ink. So it just says, "You are so." And I'm going to repeat that twice so that my sentiment is nice and bold and legible. So I just put that mask back in place, re-inked up that phrase, and then removed the mask to stamp that down. I'll set that aside, and then I'm going to do the inside of my card base. I'm using another piece of Lawn Fawn Mermaid cardstock, and then this time I'm stamping on the inside with peacock ink. And I did the little log with the heart cut into it, the beaver that is facing the log, and the sentiment that says, "I choose you." And I didn't quite get it inked up in the center, so I just did that part a third time until it was even. And now I am ready to start assembling. So I'm going to start with the sky background, and I'll glue that down at the top of my scene just using some liquid glue. I like to squeeze the corners together to make sure it's on there nice and straight. And then I'm going to take the waves and I'm going to insert two of my images into the little cuts that I've created. So I have the little duckling down at the bottom left and then also one of the grasses. So I'm just adding a touch of glue to the back of those and then fitting them in the little slots that I created with the ocean wave accents. The other two toward the top I'm just going to leave empty. And then I'll add some foam tape to the back of this to make sure that it is really well supported because I want to pop this up on the card front. So I'm just using my Scotch 3M foam tape and tearing off the lengths to the amount that I need. And then I'll remove the release papers and line that up with the bottom corners of my card. Just making sure that that is on there nice and straight as well. Then I'm going to bring in more of my images. I'm going to add the log up at the top of the waterline, also with some foam tape, and then I'm using a mixture of foam tape and liquid glue to add my beavers on top. I'll also add the cattails on either side of that log, although I did have to remove one of the little pieces of foam tape that I added because I realized that the cattail tops were going to overlap the beaver's tail, which are already popped up. So I just used liquid glue behind the one that would go over top of them. And then I have one other separate little piece of grass. I tucked that on the right hand side as well. To give the air a little bit of movement, I'm going to add the two dragonflies, and I just put them coming in from opposite sides and kind of going in opposite directions. And then I'm going to take the little trail and stamp that using some narwhal ink right behind them. And it isn't perfect. This is why I prefer to stamp with the Misty, but I really needed to add it after I figured out where my dragonflies were going. So it's not perfect, but that's all right. It's not super prominent on the card. So now I want to start adding in my sentiment. So I'm actually going to work my way backwards for the lower part of that. If you've watched any of my Plan a Card With Me videos, you'll know that I always lay out all of my stamps and dies and form the card ahead of time and then take a photo of that so I know where everything should go in the final card, or at least most things should go. And so that is what I did for this card as well. So I knew exactly where to place my letters from that reference photo. But if you haven't planned your card out ahead of time, I do recommend laying out your sentiment and just making sure you have the space for it. And, just before you glue it down, it's better to double check. But like I said, I had already laid out my dies ahead of time and snapped a photo, so I knew that there was going to be room and exactly where I wanted things to go. So I did the sum part on the lower line and justified that over toward the right hand side of the card. And then I'm going to do the gnaw part of the sentiment at the top, justified toward the left. And I just made sure that there was like the same amount of space between the end of the E on the right side and the beginning of the G on the left side, so that everything would look nice and even. So rather than cutting down an extra piece of cardstock to use as the hyphen between the two parts of the phrase, I decided to use the lily pad kind of in that place instead. So I put that right next to the W in that empty spot and then added the lily on top of that, the water lily. And then I trimmed down the rest of my stamped sentiment with the smallest of the everyday sentiment banners, and I'm going to have that over toward the left-hand side right above the word gnaw. I'll give that a minute to dry and then trim off the excess with my Cutter Bee Teflon coated scissors. Then I'm going to bring in some glitter, of course. I decided not to go crazy with it this time. I'm only going to add a couple little details here and there, but I'm going to do my dragonfly's wings, also the water lily, and I decided to add it to my cattails as well, just to have it somewhere else on the card. And then I decided that there was just a little bit too much empty space in the center of the sky right above the beavers. So I went back to that Would You Be Mine stamp set and found this little trio of hearts. So I colored those and die cut them out and added it right in that spot. And I really like how that finished off the card. So there is another look at the inside and an up close view of all of the detail. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. I had so much fun at playing with this stamp set again. I love these beavers. If you enjoyed it too, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video. All of the products that I use will be listed and linked in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And I'll also put up day 6 of the previous 2 years of Valentine Card Series in case you'd like to keep watching. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.